What if I told you that everything you were taught about the pioneers of the Wild West is untrue, and that their survival depended not on their marksmanship, but on properly fermented cabbage? Are you ready to learn the truth about how settlers, thousands of miles away from civilization, managed not only to survive the harsh winters of the Great Plains and Rocky Mountains, but also to avoid the terrible disease that decimated sailors and soldiers, scurvy? They faced a problem that was no less dangerous than Indian raids. How to stay alive and keep their strength when there was no fresh food for months and civilization was out of reach. Their diet wasn't just a meager set of supplies. It was a complex system of preservation and nutrition honed over centuries, where every ingredient was strategically important. Watch the video to the end to learn how ordinary berries and sour drinks became not just a dessert, but a life-saving medicine that kept the pioneers alive. What if I told you that the most reliable storage for meat in the Wild West was not made of wood or stone, but was completely edible? It is important to understand that the long winter for a pioneer began long before the first frost, and successful survival depended on how much meat was harvested and properly preserved in the fall. On the American frontier, where there were no refrigerators or centralized supplies, meat obtained through hunting had to become a bank of vital calories and proteins for months to come. The main methods of preservation were drying, curing, and smoking, each of which required special skill and patience. Drying or air curing was the simplest and most ancient method. Meat was cut into thin strips and hung in the sun and wind until it lost almost all its moisture, turning into a hard, almost non-perishable product. This process not only removed water, but also concentrated nutrients, making the meat compact and convenient for transport or storage. Smoking was more complicated, but provided an additional level of protection, as the smoke contained natural preservatives that slowed bacterial growth and gave the meat a special, rich flavor. Hardwoods such as oak or hickory were used for smoking to produce a dense, aromatic smoke that was not too pungent. Another important product was pemmican, invented by Native Americans and quickly adopted by trappers and settlers. Pemmican was a mixture of dried, ground meat mixed with melted fat, often with the addition of dried berries for flavor and extra vitamin C. Thanks to the fat, pemmican was incredibly high in calories and could be stored for years, making it the perfect food for long trips and extended stays. The fat served as a natural sealant that protected the meat from oxidation and spoilage, as well as providing the body with energy. These meat supplies not only fed the family, but also served as a kind of currency on the frontier, where they could be exchanged for other necessary goods or services. Dried meat and pemmican were the basis of food security for pioneer families, allowing them to remain independent of the vagaries of the weather or hunting luck during the most difficult months. The ability to properly prepare and preserve meat supplies was one of the most valuable skills that distinguished a successful settler from one who was doomed to starvation. Which of these preservation methods do you think was the most labor-intensive, and why? Share your opinion in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on new research into the history of the Wild West. Are you ready to learn how the secret of European sailors became the main weapon against a terrible disease in the Wild West? Cabbage, fermented in a simple way, was one of the most underrated but vital foods in the pioneers' diet, especially during the long winters when fresh vegetables were not available at all. It was an indispensable source of vitamin C, which is the only reliable means of preventing and treating scurvy, a disease caused by its deficiency. Sauerkraut preserved vitamin C much better than fresh vegetables, simply stored in the cellar, which lost their beneficial properties over time. The secret of sauerkraut was the fermentation process, in which natural bacteria convert the sugar contained in cabbage into lactic acid. This lactic acid is a natural preservative that allows the product to be stored for many months without spoiling, even in relatively warm conditions. The cabbage was finely chopped, tightly packed into wooden barrels or clay pots, sprinkled with salt, and left under pressure in a cool place. Barrels of sauerkraut were often buried in the ground or stored in ice houses to maintain the constant low temperature necessary for ideal preservation. In addition to cabbage, pioneers fermented other available vegetables, such as turnips and rutabagas, in the same way, but it was sauerkraut that became a true symbol of survival in harsh conditions. This product was cheap, easy to prepare, and did not require complex equipment, making it ideal for life on the frontier, where resources were limited. Surprisingly, without knowing the exact chemical formula, the pioneers intuitively used principles that were later confirmed by science, realizing that it was these sour, fermented products that protected them from invisible threats. Thus, sauerkraut was not just food, but part of a strategic survival plan, proof of the people's ingenuity and adaptation to the harshest conditions. But knowing how to obtain and preserve vitamin C was only half the battle. Ready to learn how pioneers turned bitter and sour drinks into their main weapon against winter weakness and depression? You've definitely never heard of this unique secret. What if I told you that in the Wild West, ordinary wild berries were more valuable than gold in winter? Berries picked in late summer and early fall were not just a treat, but the second most important source of vitamin C after sauerkraut, playing a critical role in preventing scurvy. They were indispensable because fresh fruits and greens were unavailable throughout the long winter, and these little berries became a veritable storehouse of health. Berry picking was one of the most important autumn rituals for pioneer families, and every woman and child, if there were any, took part in it. They gathered everything that grew: rose hips, wild currants, raspberries, cranberries, and lingonberries, with rose hips considered the most valuable due to their exceptionally high ascorbic acid content. The pioneers knew that these berries should not just be eaten, but properly preserved to retain their beneficial properties throughout the winter. The main method of preservation was drying. The berries were spread out in a thin layer on flat surfaces, such as roofs or special nets, and left to dry in the sun or in an oven at a very low temperature. Properly dried berries became hard but retained most of their vitamin C and could be stored in canvas bags or wooden boxes in a dry, cool place. The dried berries were used to make decoctions and teas which were drunk daily. A hot, slightly sour rose hip drink, for example, not only warmed you up in the cold, but also provided your daily vitamin C requirement, preventing the development of scurvy symptoms. Unlike prolonged boiling, quick brewing, or steeping, minimize the loss of vitamins from heat. The successful survival of a pioneer in winter depended on their ability to integrate wild gifts of nature into their diet. Forest berries, available to everyone, were a democratic and reliable source of vital substances, proving that nature itself gave man everything necessary for survival. Taking care to gather and properly preserve berries was a way of caring for the future, for the ability to survive the winter without losing strength and health. Like this if you think that such folk wisdom about food preservation deserves respect. What you are about to learn will change your perception of what the pioneers drank. Along with dried berries and sauerkraut, sour drinks were an important part of the winter diet, and their consumption was not a matter of taste, but a strategic necessity. In those days when vitamin C was unknown, people intuitively understood that sour and tart foods had certain antiseptic or healing properties that protected against rotten blood, the name given to scurvy. The basis of such drinks was various vinegars, which not only served as preservatives but were also a valuable product in themselves. Pioneers often made apple cider vinegar if they had apple trees, or used vinegar made from wild berries to obtain a sour, enriched liquid. The vinegar was diluted with water and drunk to refresh oneself and get one's dose of acidic substances. Another important acidic drink was the so-called pine needle broth. Pine needles, especially young ones, contain large amounts of vitamin C, and pioneers probably adopted this recipe from Native Americans who knew about the healing properties of coniferous trees. The needles were brewed in hot water, steeped, and then drunk as tea. This drink was readily available in the forested areas of the Rocky Mountains and the Pacific Northwest, making it an ideal survival food that could be prepared at any time of year. It was especially important when supplies of sauerkraut and dried berries were running low. The bitter and tart taste of the brew was seen as a sign of its healing power. These sour drinks had another important property. They helped the body absorb iron better, which prevented anemia, which often developed due to a monotonous and inadequate winter diet. Thus, sour drinks were a multifunctional product. They quenched thirst, warmed the body, prevented scurvy, and improved overall health. But even the best products had to be prepared correctly. In the next chapter, you will learn about the most important ingredient that made dried meat edible. Have you ever wondered which item on this list was the most unpleasant to eat? One of the most critical but often invisible components of the Wild West pioneers' diet was fat. Winter is a time of maximum energy expenditure to maintain body temperature and perform heavy physical labor. And fat is the most concentrated source of calories. It was so valuable that its extraction and proper preservation were no less important than hunting for meat itself. Fat was obtained from several sources. First, there was animal fat obtained while hunting bison, deer, or bears. Lard and internal fat were melted over a low heat, cleaned of impurities, and stored in large clay pots or wooden barrels. Such melted fat could be stored for a very long time at cool temperatures without going rancid. Fat served not only as a source of calories, but also as an indispensable ingredient for cooking. Dried, tough meat without fat would have been practically inedible and poorly absorbed by the body. Fat was added to pemmican, used for frying, and simply mixed with flour to make simple but nutritious flatbread. For pioneers who worked hard in the cold, fat was a kind of energy fuel. It provided a long-lasting feeling of fullness and allowed the body to generate the necessary amount of heat. A lack of fat in the diet led to rapid weight loss, hypothermia, and a weakened immune system. Fat was also used as a preservative. A thin layer of melted fat on the surface of pickles or other products created an airtight film that prevented spoilage. Thus, fat was a multifunctional resource that was used from the beginning to the end of the preparation process. Ready to learn a secret that will change your life? What if I told you that even the most skilled hunter in the Wild West couldn't survive the winter without a simple bag of grain? Although the Wild West is primarily associated with meat, grains and cereals were the basis of carbohydrate and fiber reserves, providing slow and stable energy. Corn, wheat, oats, and rye, which could be brought along or grown in a small garden, were critical to a balanced winter diet. Corn was one of the most common and important grains. It was unpretentious, yielded a good harvest even on poor soil, and could be stored as kernels or flour for many months. Corn flour was used to bake bread and tortillas and to cook porridge and soups. The simplest but most effective methods were used to preserve the grain. The grain was stored in dry, cool places, often in large sacks hung from the ceiling or in special wooden boxes. It was important to protect the supplies from rodents and moisture, which could lead to mold and spoilage. Unlike meat, which provided a quick burst of energy, grains provided long-lasting carbohydrates that were gradually released into the body. This was the ideal fuel for long hours of work, allowing the pioneers to maintain a high level of performance without experiencing sudden hunger pangs. The variety of grains also helped to avoid digestive problems by providing the body with the necessary fiber. Whole grain cereals were especially valued because they retained their outer shell and therefore more B vitamins. Oatmeal, for example, was used to make thick porridge, which was the perfect breakfast before a hard day's work in the cold. This simple product, combined with fat and a piece of dried meat, constituted a complete, albeit simple diet. Thus, grains were a quiet but reliable foundation for winter survival. They were the constant part of the diet that did not depend on hunting luck or weather conditions. Ready to learn how, in the harshest conditions, pioneers found a way to cook their meager supplies using a minimal set of tools? In the Wild West, salt was not just a seasoning, but a critically important resource that was valued as highly as gold. Its main function was preservation. Salt was the only reliable means of preserving meat and vegetables for long months, preventing them from spoiling. Without salt, winter supplies could be forgotten. Salt was used to dry cure meat and fish. The product was rubbed with coarse salt and layered in barrels, where it was kept under pressure until the salt drew out all the moisture. This process not only preserved the meat, but also made it very tough, so it had to be soaked in water before consumption. Salt was also essential for the pioneers to maintain their health. Hard physical labor, especially during the hot months, led to heavy sweating and loss of electrolytes, and salt helped to replenish this deficiency. It was added to food not only for flavor, but also to prevent cramps and weakness. Spices, while not essential for survival, played a huge psychological role. On the frontier, where life was harsh and food was monotonous, a small amount of pepper, cinnamon, or cloves brought along was a real luxury. These aromas were a reminder of home and civilization far away. Pioneers often used wild herbs and roots they found locally to replace expensive imported spices. Wild garlic, onions, and various aromatic herbs became local substitutes that added flavor and vitamins to the diet. The ability to find and use these wild seasonings correctly was another important survival skill. In addition to meat and fat, beans and peas were one of the most important sources of plant protein, as well as fiber and minerals in the pioneers' winter diet. These foods were ideal for storage. They kept for a long time, were easy to transport, and were incredibly nutritious. Bags of beans and peas, along with grain, were the basis of a pioneer family's food security. Beans and peas were grown in vegetable gardens, where they yielded a good harvest even with little care. After harvesting, they were dried and stored in large canvas bags. They could lie in a dry cellar for years without losing their nutritional properties. In winter, beans and peas became the basis of many dishes. They were used to make thick, rich soups and stews, which combined with pieces of dried meat and fat, became a full meal. These dishes were very filling and helped to keep warm on cold days. Another important property of legumes was their ability to supplement the protein contained in grains. A vegetarian diet consisting of beans and corn was almost as complete a source of protein as meat. This was important because during the most difficult winter months, hunting could be unsuccessful or impossible. Legumes required long soaking and cooking times, but this was not a problem during the long winter evenings. A pot of beans could simmer slowly over coals for many hours, requiring minimal attention, but providing food for several days. Thus, legumes were the ideal food for saving time and resources.
Careful with that knife, son.
Look how fast I am, Mother.
This potato is huge.
Despite the difficulty of transporting them, potatoes and other root vegetables such as turnips, carrots, and rutabagas were a valuable part of the pioneers' winter diet. These vegetables, if they could be brought in or grown, were an excellent source of carbohydrates, vitamins, and fiber. And most importantly, they stored well in primitive conditions. Preserving them was a real art. Root vegetables were stored in special cellars that the pioneers built underground or in hillsides. The cellar had to maintain a constant low temperature, preventing freezing and moderate humidity so that the vegetables would not dry out or rot. Potatoes were often covered with sand or soil to insulate them and prevent contact with air. Potatoes quickly became one of the most popular vegetables on the frontier. They could be boiled, fried, baked, and added to soups and stews. They were filling and high in calories, making them an indispensable addition to a meat-based diet. Turnips and rutabagas were no less important. They grew well in poor soil and were very resistant to disease. Although not as tasty as potatoes, these vegetables provided the body with essential nutrients and added variety to the winter diet. The ability to build and properly use a cellar was one of the key skills for ensuring food security. A good cellar allowed the harvest to be preserved until spring, which was a lifesaver for pioneer families. This simple but reliable method of preserving vegetables was indispensable. Ultimately, the survival of the pioneers of the Wild West depended not only on the availability of food, but also on their remarkable resourcefulness and adaptability in cooking. There were no cookbooks or complicated recipes on the frontier. There was only the need to survive, and every morsel of food was used as efficiently as possible. One of the most striking examples of ingenuity was the preparation of bread from the most unexpected ingredients. In the absence of wheat flour, pioneers used ground acorns, cattail roots, or wild rice, mixing them with cornmeal to bake some semblance of bread or flatbread. These primitive breads were tough, but provided the body with the necessary carbohydrates. Another example of adaptation was the use of byproducts. Nothing was thrown away. Blood, intestines, animal entrails, everything was put to use. Blood, for example, was used to make sausages, which were very nutritious, and intestines were used to make casings for them. This approach not only saved resources, but also maximized the nutrients extracted from each animal. Rendered fat, which was so valuable, was used repeatedly. After frying meat or cooking other dishes, it was drained, cleaned, and used again. Saving every bit of fat was vital. Another important aspect was the speed and simplicity of food preparation. During a break or a short rest, food had to be prepared quickly. Pemmican, which did not require cooking, or simple flatbread baked on coals were ideal solutions for such situations. We have seen that the diet of the pioneers of the Wild West was not a random assortment of foods, but a carefully thought out, albeit primitive, nutritional system. In it, dried meat provided calories, sauerkraut and wild berries protected against scurvy, and grains and beans provided long-term energy. It was a victory of folk wisdom and adaptation over the harshest conditions. Their survival was a lesson for anyone facing a shortage of resources. They proved that resourcefulness, knowledge of nature, and respect for every gram of food are the best guarantees of food security. Their secrets are not only history, but also a practical guide to survival far from civilization. Which of the pioneers' tactics for combating scurvy do you find most ingenious? Was it the method of pickling cabbage or the pine needle broth? Share your opinion in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on new research into the history of the American frontier.